Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Momcology's Caregiver Lounge. We're so happy and excited you could join us tonight for the launch of our third year of educational-based webinar programming. I'm Kim Buff, the founder and executive director of Momcology, and joining me from our team will be Kat Pachente and Layla Zangle, who's running our production tonight. Together, we are excited to bring the important topic of navigating the feelings of guilt and regret to the community tonight. It doesn't surprise me that the Momcology community trusts each other enough to broach this sensitive topic with both courage and empathy. For me, it's honestly quite moving to see the number of registrations still coming in. Before we get started and I introduce our wonderful speaker tonight, we have a few quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is in view-only mode. We can't hear or see you, so please feel free to get as comfortable as you'd like. We may break for questions during the webinar presentation, so please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. With that, I'd like to warmly welcome Dr. Chrissy Saley as our presenter tonight. Dr. Saley is the Director of Clinician Engagement with Courageous Parents Network, a co-author of the Standard of Psychosocial Care for Parents of Children with Cancer, and she has founded a professional group of pediatric psychologists committed to supporting caregivers through clinical intervention, research, and education. Clearly, we're a big fan. So welcome to our couch, Dr. Saley. We're so happy to have you with us tonight. And I know tonight's topic of guilt and regret is one that many of us really carry very heavily in our own ways. And again, I'm really proud of our community for taking the time to approach it together with your help. So with that, I turn it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you to the Momcology community for having me this evening. And thank you to all of you who are giving up part of your evening to spend it together here in community, which I think is really important and special to come together as those with shared experiences, shared interests, and shared mission, and supporting one another through the journeys that you're all going through. I'm going to share my screen here briefly. You should all see my slides here. The material that we're covering tonight on guilt and regret is a little dense at times, so I want to remind you that Momcology has an incredible archive of their past webinars, and so I hope that you can stay as present as possible and not worry about jotting down notes too much, because you can go back and reference this webinar at any time that's convenient for you. So I want to give a brief overview of what we can expect this evening. First, we're going to tackle the question of why. So why is it that we're talking about guilt and regret in this community? What are guilt and regret, and how are they experienced by caregivers of children with cancer? I will also be introducing a few frameworks for ways that you can go about tending to your own feelings of guilt and regret. And then we will also have time for question and answer. As I mentioned, one of the nice parts of this evening is coming together in community, and we will also have 2 opportunities for you to participate by sharing answers in the chat box, and we'll let you know when those moments are. When you do that, your responses will be anonymous, but I'll share some summaries of the themes that we see in the chat, which is one way to reinforce that these are shared experiences and hopefully that you do not feel alone. So starting with the why, I am a psychologist, as you heard earlier. So of course, I start with mental health. Caregiver mental health is a very important part of my work and my career over the last at least 10 years or so, as Kim mentioned. So I want to start with a few notes here. When it comes to parents and caregivers of children with cancer, typically the highest levels of distress are at or around the time of diagnosis. Sometimes we see this visualized with a line on a chart where you see a peak at the beginning, and then over time that distress starts to dissipate. Now, when you see charts like that with that shape, that's really an average. So we're looking at the mean of groups of people in research, for example. But of course, everyone is on their own trajectory. So some people become more distressed and stay at a high level of distress. Some people may become distressed and have peaks over time, particularly during transition points. Everyone is on their own journey. As I just mentioned, distress also increases around transition points or decision-making points. The rates that you see reported in the literature about mental health concerns vary. Sometimes researchers are measuring things like mental health symptoms. Sometimes they're measuring things that are more like complete diagnoses. And so you may see some ranges that are a bit variable with things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. But overall, largely the rates are higher among parents of children with cancer than parents of children with no serious health condition. And of course, caregivers are resilient and they find meaning and they report growth throughout the journey with their child and beyond. But we know that even in the case where treatment may end, the impact of childhood cancer lasts a long time past treatment. So you carry this experience with you. And from what I hear in my own practice is that parents are forever changed by having this experience of caring for their child with cancer. There's one paper, for example, from Siskin colleagues who, at a 5-year follow-up beyond cancer treatment, they surveyed parents and they found that 66% of those parents still had low peace of mind, regardless of relapse status or prognosis. So the worry about relapse persists, the worry about other things persists, like long-term effects or late effects of treatment, the emotional well-being of your family, and what the future looks like for everyone that you care about and love. So why does it matter? Why do we focus on caregiver functioning, caregiver well-being? Well, the literature decades ago, and this comes from developmental literature, really focused a lot on how caregiver or parent functioning affects child functioning. And in fact, a lot of supports that we have for parents, not just in the pediatric cancer space, but kind of across the board, including pediatricians' offices that might provide some sort of supports to parents who are new parents to healthy children. The justification for that has also often been that the way a parent copes influences the way a child copes. Parents who do and feel better have children who do and feel better, and that's often a framework for justifying why we would support a parent. There's other data that suggests that how a caregiver is doing can affect child health outcomes. Those may be directly related or indirectly related through how caregiver functioning might impact aspects of the child's care and then therefore the child's health. Caregiver functioning can affect a marriage or the health of a partnership when that applies. The way a caregiver functions can affect certainly how the other siblings in the family are functioning as they're navigating the journey of having a sick brother or sister. And of course, the way a caregiver functions also impacts their work life or their career. It can impact their social relationships or anything they have to do. Of course, all of these relationships are not in one direction. These are all bi-directional things, such that the things on the right also impact how a caregiver is doing. And these things then relate in other directions. So for example, the state of the marriage or partnership can in fact impact how the kids are doing in a family. Basically, all of these things are impacting one another because these things, just like cancer, are not occurring in a vacuum. But this is why I really think it matters. So when I started this journey in graduate school almost 2 decades ago, I also bought into that we should support parents because it affects their children. And as a pediatric psychologist that was child focused, this made a lot of sense to me. But now I've really landed in this place. And that of course, while parent functioning affects children, caregivers themselves deserve to feel as well as they can. In isolation from being a parent, a spouse, a colleague, an aunt, a community member, you as parents deserve to feel as well as you can. So with that, we're going to shift to our topic at hand tonight, which are about these subcategories or aspects of psychosocial functioning that can affect mental health, which are guilt and regret. Guilt and regret can be things that are sometimes unarticulated needs, which what I mean by that is that you may or may not speak about your feelings of guilt and regret to others. You may not even pause and think about and reflect on them to yourself internally in any meaningful way, but these are really common feelings. They're pretty pervasive among parents of children with different types of serious health conditions, including cancer. If you look online, you can find various definitions for guilt and regret, but I wanted to propose some broad definitions to orient ourselves to the topics for this evening. So the definition that I'm working with tonight for guilt is that guilt arises from an incongruence between our actions and the values, self-standards, or rules that we have set for ourselves. And I want to note this idea of irrational guilt. Irrational guilt is when you feel guilty for something out of your control or you did not do. And I raise this concept of irrational guilt because I know from experience and from what research tells us about parents of children with cancer that sometimes this guilt is tied to feelings of events or experiences that were completely out of your control, and yet you still feel guilty that it happened. I also want to mention that even if you're experiencing irrational feelings of guilt or that your thoughts are a bit irrational that lead to feelings of guilt, this does not mean you're an irrational person. The only thing irrational here is that cancer happens to children. When we're talking about regret, we can think of that as a set of negative emotions that occur after something has happened. That's typically how we think about regret, that we're thinking in retrospect, that this happened and now I'm feeling regret for this past event or this past action or experience. However, parents of children with serious illness, including cancer, often carry a fear of regret, or they're anticipating regret. So what that means is that they're looking down into the future, anticipating that some outcome or event may occur, and they're starting to build some anxiety that they may then feel regret as they look back on their past experiences. And so related to that is this idea of decisional regret. This particular type of regret often rises to the top for parents of seriously ill children because one of your biggest tasks as a caregiver in those circumstances is to make really big decisions for your child. And I also want to note before we proceed that, like all feelings, guilt and regret in themselves are not maladaptive. All of our feelings are things that we experience for purpose. There's biological reasons, there are social reasons. When we make mistakes that are out of line with our values, maybe we should feel guilty, right? These are things that help us teach and adapt and become better humans. But in a lot of the examples that we'll be discussing today, and what I imagine many of you experience, are guilt and regret that are extreme to the circumstances. And we'll talk more about that concept as we continue. So right now, we're going to ask you to participate in the chat. As I mentioned earlier, you will not be able to see one another's responses, but we hope that you'll engage, and I'll read out some of the themes that we see in the chat box. I'm asking if you can share what some of the sources or themes of guilt are that you are carrying. So what things have you felt guilty about since your child was diagnosed with cancer? And we'll give you a moment to start responding. Someone has already answered survivor guilt, not believing my child when they reported they were in pain, wishing we had seen things sooner. That one's coming up a few times, wishing we could catch it sooner. Not being up for making plans or making memories while we can. Was it something I did or did not do that caused the cancer? I should be a better parent to the siblings. How do I support the other siblings? Another survivor guilt, not knowing the right things to say. Hovering too much as a parent of a child who's off treatment, feeling like the rest of the family has been neglected. This is another common one, that during pregnancy, I may have done something that caused this abnormality. Feeling guilty for clinging on to the trauma and not being able to move on. Taking time for granted. Should have made other choices different for procedures. Thank you so much for sharing. I wish I discussed death with my child before they died. Feeling guilty for being exhausted. So some of those things that we're hearing were some of the things that I also listed as some examples. And I think that one of the things that I want to note here is what's coming and reminding me is that everyone who's on here today is at different stages of treatment. So some of you may be early on, close to diagnosis, some of you may be in the depths of treatment, and some of you may be in the survivorship phase or may be bereaved. And yet these feelings and many of the sources of the guilt are common. So we're going to shift now into some suggestions for how to tend to feelings of guilt. And I'm going to start with a concept called cognitive restructuring. And this concept stems from an evidence-based treatment for several mental health conditions called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And some of you may be familiar with this. Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the concept that our cognitions, our feelings, and our behavior are all interrelated. Cognition is just a scientific term that means thoughts. So that the thoughts that we have are related to our feelings relate to the thoughts that we have. Both of those things are also related to how we act, the actions we take, or how we behave. Cognitive behavioral therapy is used to treat conditions like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental health conditions. I'll give an example to highlight this interrelatedness of these three things: thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So for example, if I'm walking down the sidewalk, I live in Manhattan, so I hope this doesn't happen to me, but I come across a snake, and my automatic thought is snakes are dangerous. Then the feeling that I associate with that thought that snakes are dangerous is fear or anxiety. And so I am likely to run away, to take a few steps back, right? Now, if I were a snake expert, let's say I work for the zoo and I recognize this as some harmless snake, and maybe I had an interest in snakes, my thought might be something like, wow, this is really unusual, but how cool to be seeing this snake on the sidewalk. And then my feelings might be interested or excited, and maybe my action would be to approach the snake. So the way we think about a situation will affect how we feel and how we behave. Another example of this might be someone who feels like they are not doing good work at their job. They feel like they're not keeping up, they're falling behind, they're letting their team down. These are the thoughts that they're having. I'm letting my team down, I'm not a good colleague, my team would be better without me. The feelings associated with that might be something like, despair, worry, uselessness. And then perhaps the behavioral response to those thoughts and feelings would be to avoid the workplace. Maybe I start showing up late, maybe I start skipping days at work, and that sort of thing. And so in the context that we're speaking about today, we're focusing on guilt as a feeling that is tied to certain thoughts that we have. So cognitive restructuring is asking us to look at how we are thinking about a given situation and make some adjustments to our thoughts. And the idea is that if we can make some adjustments to how we're thinking about a situation, we may be able to alleviate some of the feelings that we're having associated with that. So think, for example, that I talked about on the screen prior. At work, I feel like I am letting my team down, and my feeling is uselessness. And maybe I rate that on a scale of 1 to 10. The intensity of that feeling is an 8. If I could adjust my thought to something else, like I've been having a hard time keeping up at work lately with the amount of stress that I've had. But in the past, I've been a powerful teammate, and I know I can get back there in the future. I may still feel guilty about the experience I'm having, but I think I could knock that level of guilt down, the magnitude that I'm feeling it down to, like, let's say a 4, when I have this thought that's a little more realistic and a little more helpful. So when we talk about restructuring our thoughts, we're not saying that you're only looking to the positives or on the bright side. The focus, however, is to make our thoughts more realistic and more helpful. You may not be able to get guilt or the associated feeling down to 0, but you may be able to alleviate some of that distress that you're experiencing. And in the context of parents and caregivers of children with cancer, it is likely that some of the thoughts that are causing your feelings of guilt are unhelpful or inaccurate. So let's go through an exercise together as an example of how this might look if someone goes and talks to a therapist about the feelings that they're having. And in full disclosure, this example I pulled directly from a paper that some of my colleagues and I published in the last year on adapting skills of cognitive behavioral therapy to parents of children with cancer. So for the sake of tonight's talk, you'll see that the caregiver is on the left in the yellow shirt and the clinician is on the right in the white shirt. And here's some of the conversation that they're having. This is related to guilt over not tending to the sibling, which is a common experience, as we noticed earlier in the chat. So here the caregiver says, I spend so much time with David, the ill child, at the hospital. I hardly see Addie, the sibling. It's like she's been abandoned, and I'm worried this is going to affect her forever. I feel terrible. So the therapist supports the caregiver in breaking this down. She says, let's look at those thoughts together. First, I heard you say that it feels like you never see Addie and that she's been abandoned. Is it true that you never see her? So here the therapist, while listening, has caught on to what I lovingly refer to as an extreme word. These are words like never, ever, forever, always. Okay, so she's catching on to that extreme word. Is it true that you never see her? And the parent responds, well, not exactly. Other than the times that David was admitted to the hospital, I am with her every day. On the days he has treatment, I'm with her in the morning and evening. And on the days he doesn't have treatment, I try to carve out some one-on-one time with her. The clinician responds, it's less time than you used to have. It's less time than it used to be. But you make a real effort to be present for Addie as much as possible. And it's good quality time. And what about the other thought? Has she been abandoned? Who else is supporting Addie? So again, the therapist has caught on to an extreme word, abandoned or abandonment. Neglect is another word similar to that. So the parent replies, actually a few people have been doing a lot for her. My parents are filling in when I can't be there, and some of the school parents are being generous. They're inviting her over. I think the teachers might be paying extra attention to her too. The therapist replies, so if you take all that together, is there a different way to think about how things are going with Addie? So again, the therapist here is trying to support the caregiver in moving the thoughts from a slightly extreme, unhelpful place to something that might be a little more realistic and a little more helpful, with the hope that it reduces some of the feeling of guilt. And so the caregiver responds, I guess there is. I do have less time with Addie, but she knows I will be with her at least in the mornings, evenings, and sometimes more. And there are other people she loves who are filling in the gaps. These changes are still hard for me, but I know she's being cared for. Therapist replies, When you look at that evidence, when you look at the evidence in that way, sometimes you see that things are a little better than you first thought, and hopefully that provides you with some relief. I also heard you say that Addie will be changed forever, and that's true. There really isn't evidence that having a brother with cancer won't impact her. However, it could be helpful to think about the positive ways she may be affected and focus on how her resiliency could be supported. So here they're making some shifts in how to think about what's going on with the sibling, and even ending with a potential action item. Let's focus on resilience, and maybe the action item is to think about how to help her boost her resilience in these set of circumstances that no one in the family can change. So if you're to do this exercise on your own, I've proposed some questions here on the screen that you can ask yourself as you learn how to be your own therapist in this scenario. The major thing to ask yourself is, what is the evidence that this thought is true? So if I go back and I think about some of those responses that you put in the chat box, you would want to take your thought and put it into a statement. So it ends with a period and not a question mark. It might be something like, my other children are neglected. I'm less present for my family. I should have caught this sooner. I'm a bad parent for not listening to my child's report of pain. Whatever that thought might be that's causing you to feel guilt. And then I want you to ask yourself, what's all the evidence that this thought is true? What is the evidence that this thought isn't true? And find some evidence. Are there parts of it that are more or less true? So these thoughts are often not black and white, right? There's nuance here. And then ask, if someone I love said this to me, how would I respond? What would I say to someone I cared about if they came to me with this same concern? And as I mentioned earlier, be looking out for extreme words in the thoughts that you have. Things like forever, always, never, everything, entirely. Should words should be triggering you to be thinking about how you're thinking, should or must. Can any of those words be modified? For example, it will be this way forever, or is it really like, it's really hard right now, but I'm hopeful we might have some change in the future? Is there something about this scenario that's temporary? What was it like in the past? And by in the past, it could be 7 days ago, 6 months ago, right? Any time frame. Is there evidence that in the past some condition has been better? What might it be like in the future? So these are all things that you can ask yourself as you're trying to make a judgment and a shift in terms of understanding the accuracy of your thought and moving it towards something that's maybe a bit more accurate and, importantly, more helpful way for you to be thinking. Here are some examples that I came up with preparing for this evening to share. Actually, I think this first one is someone put something akin to this in the chat. So I should be enjoying every moment with my child. Again, there's a should statement. Should always be a light bulb moment. So clinicians say things sometimes like, don't should on yourself. Okay, so should is a light bulb moment. I should be enjoying every moment with my child. You could adjust this to, what we are going through is difficult. I will try to enjoy as much as I can with my child, but no one enjoys all moments with their children. It's realistic. I should have caught this earlier. All parents wish cancer could have been caught earlier. Pediatric cancer is caught when it is caught. I've done everything I can to get my child treatment. I'm always letting my team at work down. Or, the amount of work I've actually been able to accomplish is making a contribution to my team, and honestly, they'd be worse off if I wasn't working at all. We could have done more to save our child. Or, we did everything we could to save our child. Science is limited, and some people cannot be cured. It doesn't mean the feelings will go away entirely, but it might bring you some relief as you adjust the thoughts that you have. Of course, another great way to tend to guilt is to talk about your feelings. You don't have to hold on to these thoughts alone. You might have people in your community, and this could be family and friends, or it could be people that are extensions of your care team, maybe people at the hospital, who can remind you that what you're feeling is normal and that you're doing the best you can. They might say, just frankly, you shouldn't feel guilty about that. There's no way you could have controlled that scenario. And coming to events and programming hosted by groups like Momcology are also a great way to talk about your concerns in community, where you can feel understood and validated by others who have been there. Another way to tend to feelings of guilt is to manage expectations. So if you remember back to the earlier slide at the beginning, I decided that tonight's definition for guilt is that guilt arises from an incongruence between our actions and the values, self-standards, or rules that we've set for ourselves. Okay, so ask yourself, am I bringing my pre-cancer expectations into my cancer life? And is that reasonable? So for example, before cancer, I was going to be the parent who spends alone time with every single one of my 3 children each week. And there was going to be an outing for all 3 children each week, and that's the type of parent I wanted to be. Is that reasonable in cancer life? Or should it be something like, I'm going to spend one-on-one time once a month, or my goal is to spend 10 minutes of focused, connected time with each child once a day? Maybe that's more reasonable. Are there some expectations that can be temporary or permanently adjusted due to lack of time or other resources, new needs in my family, and changes in what we think is important? Okay, we're going to shift now from guilt to regret, and this is another opportunity for you to participate, just as we did before. We would welcome you to put in the chat areas of topics or decisions related to caring for your child or related to your experience as a caregiver for your child that you have experienced regret, or decisions that you worry in the future you're going to regret. So please share in the chat now. Once they start coming in, we'll share some of the themes. Okay, didn't do more to investigate fertility options or preservation of fertility options for our child. We might regret a move we made to somewhere else, possibly to a different country, and not being able to treat my child if they have a relapse. Worrying about what treatment to choose next, putting my child through something painful or miserable. I regret not insisting my child speak with a therapist. Choosing an experimental treatment now, or new treatment option that does not work or creates extreme side effects that we hope to avoid, like an ICU stay or a near-death experience. Afraid I'll make the wrong decision about how to move forward when treatment is over. Regret of not speaking enough, fighting for him. Yes, the advocacy one comes up often. Not taking enough fun holidays. Not speaking up when we disagreed with our medical team. I regret how I allowed my other children to suffer without my parenting. Regret not looking at different facilities, protocols, or options before complications arise. Not having a 2-parent household for my child. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone.
Not helping my son's body more holistically. Saying all kinds of things. Lack of self-care. I regret not taking care of myself.
We can all feel these. This is really powerful. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Hmm.
I'm going to offer a framework for tending to some feelings of regret. And this is based in a body of research called the Good Parent Research. And the question I ask here, spoiler alert, the answer's on there, is it totally possible to prevent regret? And it's probably not possible to entirely prevent feelings of regret. But I think mitigation is possible, and the research shows this too. So for example, before I dive in here into this Good Parent Research, I'll share that other research in this space on decisional regret for parents of children with cancer has shown that parents who felt more informed have less regret, for example. So we're going to focus tonight on some of those things that you might be able to do to mitigate your experience of regret. The good parent research comes from a body of research led by Dr. Pamela Hines, who is a nurse researcher. And now this research has expanded to different populations of parent caregivers of children with serious illness, but it did originate in the pediatric cancer space. And so much of that research is on your population. The idea of the good parent is a concept that came early on from the parents themselves that Dr. Hines was interviewing. This idea that I just want to be a good parent, I wish to be a good parent to my child. And that is not to imply that there is such thing as a bad parent. But I think this idea resonates with many parents, whether they're parents of ill children or healthy children, that all of us who are parents really do want to be a good parent to our child. And so this was a theme that came out of these interviews, surfaced to the top level of what parents were thinking as they cared for their child with cancer. Now, as the research has progressed in this space, it has been shown that an individual sense of what it means to be a good parent for the parent does change over time. So, for example, earlier on, like towards the beginning of treatment, earlier towards the diagnosis, parents may say that their idea of being a good parent is making informed medical decisions and advocating for their child. This comes from a study published by Dr. Hill and colleagues in 2019. But over time, those ideas of what it means to be a good parent to that child is shift to things like making sure my child feels loved and focusing on my child's comfort. And the research has continued to demonstrate that parents who, in retrospect, feel like they were a good parent to their child do have fewer feelings of regret during bereavement. And so I raised this framework for all of us this evening as you think about what being a good parent to your child in this experience might mean to you. So I can share with you how other parents have defined the concept of being a good parent. And this is a study that was published just 5 years ago, so not too long ago, from a sample of parents of different types of serious illnesses, including a good percentage of parents of children with cancer. And the themes that came out of this body of research were these 10 themes of different ways to define this idea of what it means to be a good parent. First one being an advocate. This is something we heard earlier. I believe someone mentioned, a couple of you mentioned, worrying about regretting not speaking up for your child or speaking up with your healthcare team. Conveying love, letting my child know that they're loved. Providing the best possible care. Comforting my child. Creating meaningful memories with my child. Helping my child reach their fullest potential. Seeking some balance amongst my many roles. Developing my own medical insights, respecting my child as a person, and weighing my child's quality of life. So these are different ways that other parents have defined what it means to be a good parent. And I think it's an opportunity for you to do some reflecting, hopefully for yourselves, of what does it mean for you right now as you care for this child to be a good parent to them. And also consider, if you have other children that you're caring for, what does it mean to be a good parent to all my children and the set of circumstances that we're existing in? So again, what makes you feel like you're being a good parent? And then think about, are there ways you could be living more in line with what you think is important? So for example, if being an advocate to my child or being their voice is what helps me feel like a good parent and makes me feel like I'm doing what I can do. And I think that in the future, I'll have less regret if I felt like I was a strong advocate for him or her. Are there ways that you could be doing that now that maybe you haven't reached that goal entirely? And if the answer is yes, what have been the barriers to meeting that self-definition of being a good parent? And what support do you need to achieve what is important to you? So for example, if we stay in this line of thinking about advocacy, there are barriers to being a strong advocate for your child, right? Many parents feel the informational hierarchy in the medical system. Parents report feeling like there are some providers that they can speak up with and others they have less confidence in doing so, even though they know the stakes are high, right? It's not that easy. So be thinking about what makes you feel like you're being a good parent, and are there things that you can do now to enhance that feeling and for yourself? And this idea about regret, I want to raise this again, this concept of decisional regret. So one thing that you can also do as you're considering the big decisions you have to make is consider your decision-making style. We have this guide. You can see a snapshot of the image on our website at courageousparentsnetwork.org, which helps you think through how you go about making decisions, how providers convey information, and thinking about where there's congruence between those things, like between your needs as a decision maker for your child and the way that providers convey information. This guide also gives some examples of how you might problem solve when there's an incongruence there, or a hiccup, or just some challenge in the communication. I think it's important to reflect on this decision-making aspect because we know that decisional regret is one of the broader categories of concern for parents of children with cancer and all serious illness. Another thing to consider when you're weighing this idea of decisional regret, particularly if you're feeling guilt now for things that have happened in the past, I encourage you to focus on the process, not the outcome. So reflect on the circumstances surrounding the decision that you made. What was actually in or out of your control?
Okay, I found this on the web for what
Sorry. How many options were there really? This relates back to that cognitive behavioral therapy framework and looking for the evidence in things. So, be the investigator and ask yourself, what were the circumstances? What did I really have control over? What information did I have available to me? And remember that an undesirable outcome does not mean you made the wrong decision. Sometimes undesirable outcomes just happen. And as we were talking earlier about making shifts to our thoughts and shifting the way we think about a situation, I encourage you to consider shifting the feeling of regret and regretting things you did or did not do to looking at the circumstances, and perhaps a better thing to focus on to relieve some of the self-guilt and self-regret is noting that I'm just disappointed about the outcome. The outcome was disappointing and sad, and that is the case. Another important thing to keep in mind is to remember, and to say this to yourself over and over again, that you made the best decision you could at the time with the information and resources that were available to you. And there's no doubt that you made the decision you did from a loving place. You're always, as parents, you're always driven by love for your child. And so it's hard to come down on a decision that was made with that as the motivation. Before we go to Q&A, I want to name that I have been this evening suggesting ways that you can tend to your own feelings of regret. Outside of talking to someone else, these have all been suggestions that you can take and reflect on for yourself, but you are not alone in this. I do want to suggest one resource that is available to many families of children with cancer, depending on your treatment center, but certainly at most of the children's hospitals and other locations. You may have access to pediatric palliative care. Palliative care is often misconstrued. It is not the same as hospice care. Palliative care can start at the time of diagnosis and onward, even through survivorship. anytime during treatment. Palliative care clinicians are experts in symptom management, so they are often well known for helping your child with things like pain, nausea, fatigue, sleep, and these other disturbances they have. But they look at the whole person and whole family. So symptoms are not just physical symptoms, but the emotional symptoms, the existential symptoms, symptoms of spiritual distress. They are experts in communication. They are experts in the space of decision making, and they can help you navigate this experience with your child from a holistic perspective. They can be essential members of your care team. They are there to take care of the whole body. They are not there to treat the cancer. That's what the oncologists are here for. They're treating everything else with you and centering the parent as an expert on their child. And you can request palliative care. We have this guide, again, on courageousparentsnetwork.org that will tell you more about how pediatric palliative care could support you as a family as you're going through this experience. But you don't have to take my word for it. I want to introduce you to Amy Graver, this is a very short 2-minute video, and she's going to speak about her love for pediatric palliative care.
My 6 words are, I wasn't always a cancer mom, because on July 12th of 2014, I wasn't, and on July 13th by 2 p.m. we were meeting with the oncologist. So there's a real clear definition of my pre-cancer life and my life since then. Within a week, we saw a palliative care physician. We really just met with her for pain management, and then I learned more about palliative care and how rich it is, symptom management, coordination of her other healthcare teams, dealing with different therapies, and just how to make her life better as she dealt with cancer. So they were doing things that enabled her to go to school, hang out with friends, be pain-free, be symptom-free as much as possible. And that was really improved the quality and the quantity of her life. And it made an impact not only to Lauren, but to her siblings and to myself and my husband. While her oncology team was working to solve for tomorrow, palliative care was working to solve for today. I consider myself, after my experience with palliative care, as a palliative care evangelist, and I would love to spread the word about palliative care to other families.
I have been fortunate to spend a lot of time with Amy over the past 2 years. She's been a parent champion for us at CPN, talking about how palliative care helped her family and helping other families of children with cancer understand its benefits, and demystifying what it really is. And this is Amy, the best thing that Amy said. She says lots of amazing things, but this quote that she shares is one of my favorite things. And so with that, I will stop sharing screen. And I think that we can open up to some Q&A. We'll do our best to address the questions that you share.
Thank you, Christy. That was fantastic. And that was really powerful. Those words there at the end, that was very powerful. Solving for today. And that's just, anyway, that hit home. Thank you for that. There were a ton of questions in the Q&A. There was a lot. Thank you so much to everybody for being very, very engaged. I apologize. I'm Kat, by the way, for those who don't know me, Kat Vicente with Momcology. Thank you so much all for being here tonight. And I just wanted to say, as a mom, to all of you, much of what was in that Q&A were a lot of the same feelings that I had. I know Kim had. We've all been there. We've all felt these things, and much of it are things that we don't have control over. And just, love and permission and understanding out to everybody here tonight, because we can feel all of it with you. just wanted to make sure to say that. Kim, were there any questions you wanted to call out?
Yeah, there's some questions in the Q&A. There's a great one from earlier in the program. It says, I've really struggled to find a therapist who has training or experience with caregivers, and specifically caregivers of children with cancer. We hear this a lot. Chrissy, do you have any suggestions on how to find therapists who have experience with caregivers or with cognitive restructuring specifically?
So Kim, I'll echo what you said. I also hear this a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that this is a challenge for parents. So I have a few suggestions, and I guess the most important suggestion is that you vet who you talk to. So you can interview with therapists. It is very likely that you will not find someone with this area of expertise at this very specific narrow window of parents of children with cancer. There are more likely to be therapists who say that they have experience supporting caregivers generally, which might be adults who are caring for another adult, like a spouse, or an adult child that's caring for a parent, for example. And you can have a conversation with them about their openness, willingness, and experience in supporting parents of children with serious illnesses. I think there are a lot of people with experience in cognitive restructuring. So this is rooted in a very common evidence-based treatment called cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's no doubt you can find clinicians with that area of expertise. My caveat to that is just I would encourage you to find a therapist that has some flexibility in how they deliver that treatment, which is something that I've lived into as a clinician myself, because there's so much that I think support that you need holistically that is not just cognitive restructuring. So you might want to find someone that you have confidence in being able to meet more than one need. You can call your insurance company for a list of recommendations. Family may have a social worker in your clinic that often holds a list of recommendations of clinicians. And of course, old-fashioned Google searching is another way to do it. I do have access, and maybe we can, in the follow-up, we can put a link to the special interest group that I founded. We do have a how to find a therapist guide with a list of questions that you might consider as a parent of a child with serious illness when you go about talking to potential therapists.
Question here. It kind of goes back to your great quote about that all the decisions we make are ones with love, right? And we have to remember that. Somebody had a question about what about regret when the decisions were made just from simply being exhausted, emotionally, physically, mentally exhausted, and having regret about those. And I would assume that you have to take that into account, right? That you made these decisions under distress and have some compassion and empathy for yourself as well. These are some of the most difficult circumstances a parent can have to make decisions in, no matter what they are.
Yeah, when I
How do
read
you?
that,
Yeah.
my gut reaction is, of course you did.
Yeah.
Because you were mentally and emotionally and physically exhausted.
Yeah.
I go back to leaning on, like you're suggesting, Kim, giving yourself some grace.
Mhm.
And also, again, even though that is the case, you still are making the best decision you could at that time with the resources that were available to you, which is only a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of, pizzazz.
It's not a lot. Yeah.
So, I think my response is the same, that those were the conditions and you made the best decision you could,
Yeah.
those conditions. And thank you for asking that question.
A lot of questions here about, having to make decisions or wishing they had more information or regretting not having more information or getting more informed. And there seems to be a theme. There's a lot of mention of those concerns and those feelings of regret. Do you have any words to share for folks that are focusing in that area?
Yes, I have a couple of thoughts on this. One, just ask questions until you're blue in the face if you need to. Two, bring someone with you to appointments that isn't as tired or in it. that can be smart and ask good questions that you might not think to ask. 3, when you're involved in programming like Momcology offers, you have access to other parents that you can say, what do you wish you'd asked? Does anybody else have ideas for things to ask? And I think asking people who have been there will help you generate some ideas. So ask about short-term things, ask about long-term things, gather as much information as possible. With that, I will say, though, as I mentioned earlier, it is important to understand your decision-making style, because we're always proponents of shared decision-making, which is where the clinician and the parent come together to make a decision. However, it is the case that there may be some of you who genuinely prefer the oncologist taking more of a leadership role and making a stronger recommendation. There are some of you that may want to be the one who takes more leadership in conversations. So think about how you make decisions best that are in line with your preferences and your values as a family, and reflect on that as you go into these decision-making moments.
I like that. One of our attendees said, write down the questions as you think of them. Because, that's a good point. Because, you might wake up in the middle of the night. I used to keep a notepad by my bed, wake up in the middle of the night with a question that I never would have thought out about when I'm sitting in front of the doctor. And then I would not have remembered it had I waited to write it down. So, we can only carry around so much in our brains. We're carrying around an awful lot when our kids are in treatment. And, just forgiveness for ourselves too, folks, because we don't know what we don't know. And we are thrust into this experience that we don't even have the language set for. We do not speak this language yet most of us anyway, when we start this. So, just reminder to give ourselves breaks too, because we're not experts in cancer. We're parents, and we're just trying to learn to be experts in that, most of us, when we start this process.
Another thing you can do is you can say to your provider, what do other families ask when you're having these questions with them? What am I missing?
Great question.
What is it that you wish you could say to me that you feel like maybe I'm not ready to hear? Right?
Mm.
Like, let them know. I actually want really open communication, set the stage for that, because providers are people too, and they're often trying to read you and judge you and titrate the information they give and how they convey it, because they want to do the best they can to support you in the way that you need to be supported. But they might be making some assumptions that aren't in line with what you think that your needs really are. So I would open yourself up to that with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have just one last question here, and it's a little bit, we're going to reframe a little bit, but kind of tie it back in, because I think this does have to do with regret. It has to do with communication, and it has to do with potentially shared decision making, I think, between a provider and a patient. So we have a participant asking, how do I navigate seeking a second opinion if my child's oncologist isn't willing to help with initiating a review? So again, I think that's that kind of, how do we communicate what's important to us in a way that garners, the conversation to be had with the physician in a meaningful and productive way? So a little bit different here, but I think that it kind of all ties back, because we don't want to have regret that we didn't have those conversations or push them forward.
Well, first I'll validate you are always entitled to a second opinion and a third opinion and a fourth opinion, because that's your child. So go get the opinions you want to get. And ideally, your provider will cooperate with you, and most will, really. And I'm sorry that is the situation that you're in, and maybe it's not the best fit for you and your family. If that's the case, I'd pick up the phone and start calling around. This goes back to that wanting to be a good advocate for your child, and this is the barrier, right? That person is implying or suggesting, either directly or indirectly, that maybe you shouldn't be pursuing this, or you ought to not be doing this. But this is your kid, so I would go for it. I think you can also potentially engage other support staff. So for example, this is a place where if you do have palliative care, they will help elevate your voice as the parent and centering your voice as the important voice in this conversation. You can try to engage the social worker on your team, or if there's a psychologist at your center, that might also help you navigate these conversations. But if you can't tell, this is something I feel pretty strongly about, that if a second opinion is something you desire, then go get it.
Thank you.
There's somebody mentioning, and we're running out of time, folks, sorry, but somebody did mention having guilt and struggling, feeling depressed and anxious a long time off after treatment. And this person said 3 years. I'm over 10. I'm still feeling it. So it's okay. Like I feel like it's par for the course.
Yeah, that's why
Kind of like you can't unring the bell.
yeah, that's why we talk about mitigating, right? There's
Yep.
complete prevention here, but there's coping with it, different ways to cope with it as it goes along with you, and you carry this as a part of who you are now.
Speaking of ways to cope, shameless plugs. We have some community events coming up, and I feel like this conversation could potentially really continue into our upcoming events. So for those of you, there's a Dadcology event on February 15th where we welcome all of our dads. Any stage of treatment are welcome to attend. It's 11 to 12:30. Again, that's February 15th. You can find all of this on momcology.org with the links to register. We also have a bereaved parents coffee break on the 20th. That's at 7 p.m. And then we have a full community coffee break on the 22nd at 11 a.m. These are all virtual, and the links to register are on our website. So we welcome you to continue the conversation in community events. This is open to everybody, and we welcome you to spread the word, and we hope to see you there. I also put in the chat is our registration for the next Caregiver Lounge. So that will be February 25th. And this one is about priority setting in pediatric acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Many of you perhaps participated in a study regarding this, and we have some of those results from that study for you, and it'll be a nice conversation. Kim, do you have anything else to add before we sign off? Oh, somebody
No,
raised.
I think this was a wonderful start to the 2025 Caregiver Lounge series. Thank you, Chrissy, Dr. Saley, for spending time with us and sharing with us. It was great. We hope this is just the beginning of many other collaborations with yourself and Courageous Parents Network. I certainly Momcology is full of courageous parents as well. So we're all on the same page here. And we love this program and the opportunity to find experts in these topics and subjects that are a little bit hard to access for everybody. And being able to bring it into everyone's living room and explore things together is really meaningful to us and to Momcology, and we hope everyone has benefited from it, and we're just gonna keep moving from here. So good night, everyone. Thank you, and peace to you and your families. Thank you.